Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Hello and welcome to the Encounter program. I'm Reverend Rachel Helgeson. I'm the pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church in Endwell, New York. Today I'm excited to introduce you to a friend and colleague, Reverend Dr. April Stace. She is the author of the newly released book, White Knuckle Love. I personally love this book, and I'm so excited to be able to talk to her about it. April's life has had all sorts of twists and turns, and who she is authentically and that's how she explores in her book. So I don't want to give all of that away right at the very beginning, but I do want you to hear my own excitement about this and to share it with you. And I don't usually do this, but if you have a chance, you might want to read this book. Go on Amazon or your local bookseller. We have a couple of local booksellers. There's White Knuckle Love, April Stace. There you go. And you can find it. So I think you too will also love this book. So April, I'm now gushing a little bit, but I'm so glad I got to read your book. And I'm just curious, what was it like for you to sit down and create a memoir like this about your life, and to be able to sort of put it out there into the world and say, okay, this is mine, but now it is and it isn't, as authors do.
Yeah, it's funny. I never thought that I would write a memoir. For a very long time, I was, I really thought I'm going to write academic books, right? That's going to be my, how I am in the world. And even when I started this book, I really had the idea that, okay, I'm going to write basically like a pastoral care textbook. And it'll be, really heavily reliant on story. I really thought I'm going to write a textbook that isn't boring, but it's going to be a textbook. But as I kept going, that's the thing about the subject matter itself, which, is a lot of my interaction with patients at hospital, at the hospital, is that you can't really tell those stories and get the meaning across without telling your own story. So there was that. And then I had the really good fortune to go to a writer's week at the Collegeville Institute in Minnesota, where I worked with a writing coach who was basically like, drop the textbook idea now and you're writing a memoir. And I guess I was just in enough of a vulnerable state that I said, okay, I'm going to do that. So I have really fought myself just with the idea that I wrote a memoir. I think I believed it was, my life wasn't interesting enough, or, who am I to write a memoir? And when I said that to my writing coach, actually, he said, well, maybe your life isn't interesting enough, but the past couple of years have been interesting enough. And I thought, okay, that's fair.
Those are wise words.
Exactly.
And so you heard April talk a little bit. The book does go through her work when things sort of fall apart in her world and she's pulling it back together. And the place where she finds that is not the place where she expects it to. So I kind of find that interesting that your book sort of parallels the way that you wrote it to your own life and experience. I find that hearing you say that right now, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
God has a way of pulling things together that anyway, so she ends up at the hospital, and it's only supposed to be a chaplaincy position for a little while. April, I don't want to speak to all of that, but it turns into much more. And so how can you talk a little bit more about that chaplaincy, the period of time that you were doing that, and that in-between time, like while your life was sort of reshaping and reforming?
Sure. So I got my PhD in 2014, which was down in Maryland. And, the way a PhD program works is it's like you you really put your whole life on hold to finish this thing, right? And I was doing that with a young child too. Like my son was just 2 or 3 years old when I started. And I just drove myself through that program, because I was just very aware, like I felt old, I was a parent. I was like, I've got to get my life in gear, so like, I can't be one of these people that luxuriate in a PhD program for 7 or 8 years, right? Like I have to just get through it. And so I finished in 2014 and faced what was even a worse job market than what it was when I went into it. I was really lucky to get a 1-year position part-time after I graduated. But I was really left kind of thinking like, and I mean, applying for PhD jobs, for professor jobs, it takes up so much time. It's, I mean, you have to, it's basically like writing a term paper for every job. It's so labor intensive. And it became really clear to me at a certain point that this was not going to work out for me. Like maybe I'd be able to get a job like in a couple of years, but it just wasn't going to work out. And at the same time as that was happening, I was also lucky enough to be invited to apply for a job at the Riverside Church in New York City as their minister of worship. So with much trepidation, I accepted the job. Excited about it. It was a new thing. New York City has always been really hard for me. I never imagined living there. I never wanted to live there. But I also was like, well, what else am I going to do? And this is a great opportunity. So I'm going to go. Yeah. So it ended up, I want to say, like, I have nothing bad to say about the Riverside Church. The congregation I found to be just absolutely lovely. And entertaining and brilliant and fascinating, just, wonderful, wonderful people. But it just really, the institution, the structure of the institution, it just was not a good fit. So that was a struggle for me. And then at the same time, I was also living in New York by myself because my son and my then husband had to like finish out their school years, basically. And anyone who, has had a young child or does have a young child will resonate with this. Is like, you don't get more than usually like a day here and there to yourself when you have a kid. I would say like under the age of 10 even. Now my kid is especially kind of clingy, but he was only in second grade at the time. And it was like all of a sudden I had 2 months where I could just, I didn't know what to do with myself. Like, it was amazing. I would do silly things like I'm going to have peanut butter and crackers for dinner just because I could, and I didn't feel like making dinner and that was fine with me. And, eat what I want, when I want, and get up when I want. It was just so luxurious. But I think more than anything, what that time did was really, it made it kind of impossible for me to go back to what I had been doing, which was being, a very active part of a straight marriage, like a heterosexual marriage, despite the fact that both me and my then husband knew that I was gay. And it was kind of like once I had a chance to breathe and actually get in touch with myself, the way I described it is like you push one domino over and then you just don't have control after that. The dominoes just keep falling and eventually they fall into freedom. But you have to let everything fall first. So my marriage fell. My job at Riverside fell for all kinds of complicated but very good reasons. And then I found myself like jobless and virtually homeless in New York City and marriageless. And I was really scared. Like, the Riverside job was kind of a big deal in my field, right? Like it's a big deal to go work at a big church, but man, if you work at a big church and then you leave after like 9 months or a year, that's not good. Like that does not reflect well on you. So I had no idea what I was going to do. I started looking around for like, I started reading like internet articles, like what to do when you're looking for a job.
As you do.
And one of them said like, you should get more training. And at first I was like, I have a PhD. Like, I think the boat has sailed. I don't know what else I'm gonna, like, I can't go get another degree. And then it dawned on me, it was over Thanksgiving weekend, I remember it really well, that I had always wanted to do CPE, which most people have to do to get ordained. And I had actually entered seminary thinking I would be a chaplain, but then kind of gave it up because I got kind of intoxicated with scholarship and stuff like that. I was just like, oh, all right, that's training. Like, okay, I'm going to do that. And so, I applied. But even as I was waiting for the summer to come, I just applied for a summer program. I was applying for other jobs, right? Like all over the country, just because my main thing was like, I've got to get a job. I had to survive. Did I go over what you asked me?
No. Yeah, you're still doing it, because we talked about how you reshaped and reformed, and how. So you talked about the reshaped and reformed part, and then the next part was the hospital and how you landed there, and you're going right there into what this next season of your life was in the hospital, and the stories and how people affected you and how you affected them and how you met in the middle of all of that. So yeah, you're answering the question just great. Good,
I'm glad. Yeah. So my first hospital, so CPE is the training program that hospital chaplains have to go through. It stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. And I luckily, or, by the grace of God, was assigned to a hospital who had an amazing supervisor. Her name is Yael Shmilevitz. She's a rabbi, and she's also was born in Israel, so she's Israeli, although she's now has American citizenship. So Israeli culture is like really direct, right? It's known for being super direct and like not very tactful, and that was just exactly what I needed that summer. And I remember, I went into this program really thinking like, okay, I think I've been doing this for a while. I've been a pastor at that point for maybe like 15 years, like kind of been around the block, know how to do a hospital visit. And so I kind of went in thinking like, I'm just going to check this box off. But within the first week, it was clear to me that there was an opportunity in front of me to grow, like in a way that I don't think I had grown since I was maybe a freshman in college. Like really growing, getting to know myself. And I think the most important thing was getting feedback on me, feedback on how I came across and what I did and work I did and stuff like that. And Yael, with her direct, kind of laser sharp critique, was just exactly the right person to do that. And then I got a job like a week or two into that program. It was down in North Carolina. It would have been a great, man, it just, everything about that job sounded like exactly what I needed. It was like stable. It was in a nice part of like outside of Durham or Raleigh or something. Yeah. Like what they call traffic down there. It was like nothing compared to, they were like, they were driving me to a restaurant and they were like, oh, we're in a traffic jam. Sorry about this. And I was literally like, we're still moving. Like what,
like, that's not
what
traffic.
Is the traffic jam? Yeah. And, it was affordable and like, I could just see taking my son down there. And so everything was like pointing to take the job. Of course I've been like looking for a job for, more than half a year at that point. But really and truly, I was growing in such an important way and really reevaluating my relationship to ministry in general, I think, that I turned it down to stay for an unpaid internship in Manhattan. It was at once the absolute stupidest and absolute best decision I ever made.
Walking by faith and not by sight. So if you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Reverend Dr. April Stace, and she wrote her memoir, White Knuckle Love, and we've been talking a bit about how her life sort of went apart as she made some realizations about herself, but also as she was trying to figure out what now and what next. And the hospital that she was working at the time, which you just heard for a moment ago, she did an internship, really was formative to try to help her figure that out. And she writes that in her book. And it's interesting to hear you talk about your CPE, the Clinical Pastoral Education Supervisor, being someone who really helped that journey for someone who's coming from a Christian background. Having a CPE supervisor, it's Israeli Jewish, who's saying, okay, let's get to the real work now. And we just talked a little bit about how walking by faith and not by sight, how that everything that points in one direction, but not necessarily isn't the direction that needs to be taken. So April's book tells a lot of the story. So I don't want to give all of those away because I really want you to read the book. But I would say that I'd like to talk to April about what happened next after coming out of that program. What were the next steps after your chaplaincy and after having this sort of walking out and looking inside, but also looking outside of yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I had applied for that CPE summer program, which is an unpaid internship. It's like that for just about everybody. I had, at the same time I applied for that, I had applied for a year-long residency program. Again, it was very much driven by like, I need a job. So yeah, I'll do this and we'll see where it goes. So I started a residency year at a different hospital in New York. And it was a much bigger hospital. I want to say like had several hospitals within it. And I was assigned to, I mean, really the only way I could make it work was that the hospital was just about 20 blocks north of where my son went to school. Okay. So it was something that would work with the commute to get him and pick him up and stuff like that. So that's really the only way that it worked. And so it was St. Luke's Hospital, which is in Morningside Heights in New York City, a little bit lower socioeconomic status generally among the patients. And my supervisor there was also a rabbi, wonderful Orthodox rabbi named Nathan, who again just really incisively called me on things that I needed to be called on. But that was, I think, where I really started to build relationships with patients more, was in that hospital. And the process of being with people who both knew at the moment and also in their lives had, known just so much suffering and so much marginalization and being on the outside. And like I describe in the book, for example, there's this, when I was at the hospital over the summer, it was a very, very wealthy hospital. I mean, this hospital is like better than some hotels, like at this point they have robots actually delivering medicine to people. It's that, like, it's just, it has so much money. I know. It's crazy. Wow. And the food there was like amazing. I mean, I remember going into patient's room and smelling bacon, which I love. And I just like, oh my God, I want to eat that bacon.
Like, that's delicious.
You never think that about hospital food,
No. God bless you, medical people, but we don't really think that. Thank you for your service, but
exactly. But it was so good. And but even then, like many of the patients there were like, oh, I don't like this food, like grumbling about the hospital food, which again, like totally normal. We're all miserable in the hospital.
Right. But
I was really moved when I realized when I was at St. Luke's and the food was not that quality. It was more along the lines of what we would say is typical hospital food. And when I realized that the patients were like really gobbling the food and actually were telling me how good it was and how much they loved it. And some of them were saying like, yeah, you know, at the rich hospital, everyone was like, I can't wait to get out of here. But in this hospital, everyone was like, well, I'm getting 3 meals and like I have a bed. Like this is pretty actually great. Like I'm okay. I mean, I don't want to stay forever, but it's fine. And just realizing the very, very different perspectives on life that my patients had. Really, I think it changed me. Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who's listening in or watching this about this journey that you were on in your own life? I mean, not that your journey is over. Life doesn't end like that just because you've written a book and it's a book that you weren't expecting to write. It doesn't mean that's over. But at this point, as you look at that season of your life and that how things sort of fell apart and got put back together in ways that you at the time wouldn't have necessarily expected, but I've heard you say, and you write this in your book too, how everything came back together in a way that it was way better than you could have ever expected it to find the love of your life, to be able to, because now you are teaching at a seminary, correct?
Yes.
You're writing books. I mean, everything sort of has come together, but not in the way that you had pictured it for yourself, but in a way that has been authentic to who you are and what you're about, and to be able to speak with your own voice. So how would you encourage others to working on their faith life to look at themselves in that way? I mean, not that happens overnight, clearly, but
oh man, it's like this is actually something I think about a lot, and I have a lot of really complicated feelings about it. Because, well, so one thing is that, yeah, I'm like so much happier now than I ever thought I could be. And so much more just, I want to say grounded and resilient and able to just kind of go along with things. But also, you know, the things that I have now that I was striving so much for, they actually don't matter as much to me. Mm-hmm. So, you know, whereas I think thought that getting a job, like, I mean, believe me, jobs are important. I'm not
well, we all know that.
We all need to be paid. But I don't know. Buddhism has this term grasping. And it's this idea that the human spirit is always like an unenlightened spirit is always trying to hold on to illusions and make them permanent by holding on to them. And I think my life before this was just so much grasping. It was so much just trying to create something solid. But the problem was I was trying to build something that wasn't like authentically out of my spirit. So it was never gonna be a strong fortress. It was just weak from the outset. And I really thought that I was strong enough to not be myself and have a happy life. But as it turns out, I don't think, first of all, that's not strength. And second of all, it's kind of impossible. And I also remember, so second thing is I remember when I was in my very, very early 20s, just graduated from college, was really just getting into church and Christianity, like in a new way. And I remember saying the prayer, like asking God to turn me inside out so that I really wanted to be as grounded and as wise as some of the adults, like the older adults that were at my church. And I just was like, do whatever you have to do with me to give me that. And I remember in the middle of this whole like crisis in New York City, just being like, that was the dumbest prayer I have ever prayed.
Right.
Like, I do not want this anymore, you know? So it's this weird tension, right? Of being like, I would never wish this on my worst enemy, but also I really hope that everyone gets to experience this kind of freedom. But I think for a lot of us, you can't get to that without being willing to sacrifice some of your idols, like the idols you've made of who you are and who you want to be and what success looks like and what you're willing to risk. I mean, just, you have to be willing to smash those idols. And that hurts. It is no joke. I see this sometimes, so I do some spiritual direction, and I teach, I have students, and sometimes I see this in people who are like a little, I don't want to say behind me because it's not linear, but who are in an earlier phase of their ministry life, right? And it's like I can see, like, oh God, you're gonna need to be smashed before you come to life. And that's such a complicated feeling to have, because like I don't want anyone to be smashed.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like once you've been through it, you can see it elsewhere,
And for Christians, we think about that as resurrection, the whole living into hope. So,
yeah.
And many religions have some sort of living into hope, rebuilding, reframing, rising from the ashes. I've so enjoyed my time with you, April. And for those of you that have been with us for this time, this is April Stace. She's the author of White Knuckle Love. And I encourage you to go on Amazon, go to Barnes & Noble, go to the local bookstore and find this book. We just skimmed the surface of what she talks about and her memoir. As you heard, that she reluctantly went into writing this, but it is beautifully said and beautifully done. And for those of you all who are in the midst of the ashes of whatever that might look like, your life being turned upside down, know that there is hope, that God is doing something in and through you. Not that God wanted you to go through all of that, but that you haven't been let go of, and that others have been through things maybe not the same as yours, but to know that there is still light and love, and to hold on to that. So, and if you need help, there's resources in our community. Always, you can call United Way 211 or Broome County Council of Churches, which Encounter program is sponsored by, and we will find ways to connect you with people to help you if you need that sort of help. But thank you again, April. We're so excited about your book, White Knuckle Love, and I'm so glad that you're able to talk to our folks here in Broome County on the Encounter program. Blessings and thank you.
Thank you.